Well, I'm so excited for the Christmas season that we're in, for the next few weeks that are coming here at Oaks Church. Next week is Christmas at Oaks Church, and it's one of our favorite days of the entire year. One of the best days to invite your friends and family to be with you at church. And so it's gonna be incredible. Make sure you're here, be inviting your people to be with us at church, and let's just believe together that God is gonna use next week, the 4 services and everything that's going on to bring the message of hope to a lot of people. And by the way, no Wednesday prayer meeting is really because our team is gonna be working so hard to get ready for next week. And so we're just gonna be actively all week long getting ready for next Sunday. Would you do the same? Would you be praying with us? Would you be inviting people? And let's come believing for just an explosion of hope in our community. It's gonna be great. Well, we're gonna take a pause from the book of Genesis just for a few weeks. We're gonna pick it back up January 1st. We'll have a special service that day, one service on January 1st, and we'll get back into Genesis during the month of January. But today, I wanted to share with you the Christmas story, and really part of the Christmas story that to me is just so powerful, but a part that we don't often talk about. I wanna share the story of how an unlikely person got to be one of the very first people to see the Messiah had come, to see that Jesus had been born. This is the story of an 84-year-old widow named Anna in Luke chapter 2. And what I'm gonna read is just 3 verses, and it comes in the context of the birth of Jesus and Mary and Joseph hearing the promise of God and having Jesus born. The context of the shepherds coming in from the fields to worship and bring honor to Jesus. And then Jesus, as was custom, was presented at the temple about 40 or so days after he was born. And it's there he meets this old man by the name of Simeon and this old woman by the name of Anna. Luke chapter 2, starting in verse 36. There was also a prophet, Anna, the daughter of Penuel of the tribe of Asher. She was very old. She had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, and then was a widow until she was 84. How many of you know there's a lot of life between those 2 lines? She never left the temple, but worshiped night and day, fasting and praying. Coming up to them, that is, Mary, Joseph, the baby Jesus, and her friend Simeon, coming up to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. 3 verses, a whole life told in 3 verses. Most of us might feel gypped. I lived 84 years and all I get was 3 verses about my life. But Anna did not see things like most of us. Her life wasn't summed up by her job, by her accomplishments, or even by her family. She lived for God and God alone. Now, obviously, we don't have a lot of the details of Anna's life. We just have these 3 verses, but in these 3 verses are some clues, and it's not hard to imagine what her life was like. It's not hard to wonder what happened in between the lines of these 3 short verses. For example, I bet she was the apple of her father's eye. Penuel, a hardworking farmer from Jerusalem who worked out in the fields, provided a modest life for his family, loved all of his kids, but had a special place in his heart for his daughter, Anna, his precious little girl. Now, she would tag along with her dad out into the field. She wanted to go out to work with him, and so she was by his hip all the time, and she developed kind of a strong work ethic all her own, and her father, Penuel, was so proud to have his daughter, Anna, always by his side. Now, as she grew older, her beauty became evident to everybody. I mean, she was a catch. And guys lined up at the house, vying for her attention. And Penuel, he had to keep his eye on all of these guys as they were jockeying for a position to try to gain Anna's attention. But one stood out above them all. Well, we'll say his name was Ethan. And Ethan especially was persistent in trying to get Anna's attention. And boy, did she ever take notice of Ethan as well. It wasn't long before they fell madly in love with each other. Everybody knew they were meant to be together. Their love was obvious. Where you saw one, you saw the other. And people knew it's not going to be much longer probably before they're married. They were the it couple in town. They were Romeo and Juliet. They were Sonny and Cher. They were Ross and Rachel. They were Beyonce and Jay-Z. You get what I'm saying? I mean, they were the it couple in town. Their love was just apparent to everybody. Sure enough, it wasn't that much longer before they got married. They began to start their life together. And they would dream and talk about their future and their family, where they would live. She loved to joke with him about how many kids they would have. She wanted a really big family. They had hopes and dreams, their whole life ahead of them. Young couple, they were only teenagers when they met and got married. Whole life was ahead for them. Before Anna knew it, time had just flown by, and they had been married 7 years already. 7 of the greatest years of her life. She secretly hoped that this would be the year that God would bless them with a baby. They had been trying for so long. But this wasn't going to be a year of joy and celebration. This was going to be a year of heartache and sorrow. Ethan came in from the fields one day and he had a fever. Now, Anna didn't think much of it. He was sick, it happens. But as time went on and as the days went by, he didn't get better. He progressively got worse. And she began to get nervous and a little scared. And as the fever worsened and she began to see that something tragic was about to happen, and that's what did happen. Ethan died. No warning, no explanation. One day she's living the best life she could have ever imagined. The next day she's a 22-year-old widow. Her father encouraged her to move home. Her friend said she should marry her brother-in-law. I mean, that was the custom. That was the way that she could be taken care of. There certainly was no shortage of men in town that would have loved to be with Anna, but she wasn't interested in any of them, and she wasn't interested in any of that. She spent most of her time at the temple praying. And over time, the grief that she suffered from the loss of her husband, it began to lessen. Over time, it began to lessen. But a new grief and a new heaviness of heart began to grow in her. It was a grief over God's people and their hardness of heart and their apathy towards the things of God. She saw this in her people and she began to grieve over that. Her heart was broken that God's people, her people, would honor God with their lips, but dishonor God with the way they lived their lives. It just broke her heart. And so she spent all of her time praying at the temple for her people. Now, her friends and even her family told her after some time went by, "You're wasting your life. It's time to move on, Anna. You've got to get over your grief," they would say, "and restart your life." They were secretly embarrassed by how much time that she was spending at the temple when everybody else her age was having families and living their life. Even the religious workers at the temple would say, "Anna, why don't you begin to teach some of the others what you've learned in the spiritual disciplines that you've gained over time? Do something constructive already." But that's not how Anna saw it. Anna felt the best use of her time, the best use of her life, was to be in constant prayer to God for his people, for there to be a breakthrough. And over time, there's a peace that grew in Anna and she knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Now, more time went by, and at this point, Anna, she's an old woman, 84 years old. Her body was frail from age and from frequent fasting, but her spirit was strong and the voice of God clear in her life. And she began to hear God speaking to her about his plans for his people, about the plan that he had to even redeem his people, that a baby would be born that would change everything. So Anna began to sleep less and pray more, and the expectation for what God was going to do, it began to grow inside of her, and she sensed that the time was drawing close. And then one day it happened. As she was in the temple praying, as she always was, she heard her friend Simeon, who was about her age, an old man, shout for joy in this youthful tone. And she looked over, and there was her friend Simeon in the temple courts, standing there with a young man and a young woman, and the young woman was holding a baby. She rushed over and stood patiently behind Simeon to get a glimpse of this baby as her heart began to beat faster and faster. Now, Simeon was holding the baby. He began to pray over this baby, and then he began to prophesy over the baby. And as he closed his time of prayer and prophecy over the child, worshiping the Lord, to her surprise, he turned and handed her the baby. She took this baby carefully in her arms. It had been a long time since she'd held a baby. And she looked down at this little baby, tears streaming down her face as God began to testify to her spirit, you're holding the promise of God. Her voice cracked with emotion as she looked up at the young woman and said, what's his name? Jesus, Mary answered. We've named him Jesus. Anna knew the significance of that name and what it meant. She looked back down at the baby, and at that moment, he opened his eyes and looked right into hers. This old 84-year-old widow named Anna, which, by the way, means the grace of God. From the tribe of Asher, which means the face of God. She was looking into the eyes of the Messiah, God in the flesh, Jesus, her Savior. By the grace of God, Anna got to see the face of God. And as those eyes looked back at hers, God began to testify, and those eyes began to reveal the heart of God, which said, Anna, when your husband died, when Ethan died, I saw you there, and I was with you. When you were afraid for your future and you didn't know how things were going to work out, I saw you then, and I was right by your side. When you were in the temple praying and you were full of doubt and insecurity and heartache as you felt like life was passing you by, I want you to know I was in those doubts, and I saw you. I heard your questions, and I was right there beside you. Your moments of anger, which you wouldn't let anybody else see, when you thought no one was looking and you let out some anger towards me, I want you to know that I heard you and I saw you, and I was with you then too. In all these years, I've seen you and I've been with you. I've never left your side. By the grace of God, Anna got to hold and see the face of God. I wonder if the message of this Christmas season isn't the same for us. that he sees you, that he's with you. When you feel like he's not, and when you're walking through the greatest heartache you've ever had to walk through, the fears, the doubts, the anger, his eyes are looking right at you. He's right there in the middle of it with you. He sees you, and he loves you. I just need you to wrap your head around the magnitude of these 3 verses, and this is the significance of this moment with Anna, an 84-year-old widow. In the midst of God sending his son to redeem and save his people, a plan that had been initiated since the very beginning of time. In the midst of all of the history making that was going on, God cared enough to look down and share his love and communicate his heart in his presence with an 84-year-old woman named Anna who only got 3 verses about her life. And I think it's just amazing that when God sends his son into the world, I mean, this would change, and this has changed everything. He doesn't present his son, this baby doesn't get presented before kings and queens and presidents of nations in front of the wealthy. He deserved it. But the Son of God, God in the flesh, isn't presented to any of them. He is presented in the Christmas story in Luke chapter 2 to a poor man and his teenage fiance, to shepherds out in a field that nobody cared anything about, and to 2 old people, including 84-year-old widow named Anna, that I see you and that I love you, and that this message of hope is for you, and I'm with you. And by communicating to them first, he communicates to all of us who aren't worthy, who shouldn't get an audience with the king. He shouldn't know our name or care about what we're going through, but he does. And because he communicated to them his presence and his love, he is communicating to us the same message. He looked into Anna's eyes, and that look said it all. He's saying the same thing. I see you. I've always seen you. I love you. I've always loved you. I'm with you. I've always been with you. Shortly after this moment that Anna had with baby Jesus, where God spoke directly to her, God would call her home. No more praying, no more fasting, no more grieving, just an eternity to spend with her heavenly Father. She was the apple of his eye too. The message of Christmas, the message of these 3 verses is the good news that God loves us. And not only does he see us, he's with us. He's with you in all of it. Just like the prophet Isaiah declared hundreds of years before this moment with Anna. In chapter 9, the prophet declares, "For unto you a child will be born. To you a son will be given, and the governments will rest on his shoulders. His name will be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." It's the good news. The glory of God has come. He's here with you today. For those who put their trust in him, we know his presence is with us through it all. And he can be here for you and with you today. So what is our application? What is our action step? What is our response to this incredible message of hope? I think the first one is that the good news of the gospel should be louder in our lives than the discouragement of our circumstances. I'm not saying your circumstances aren't hard or that your life isn't full of difficulty. I just think that the power of the gospel and the good news about Jesus should be a little bit louder than the discouragement that we walk through from time to time. And I think our response should be as Simeon's was. That when he recognized that the Messiah had come, he just begins to worship. I think the only response to the hope of Jesus is that we would worship him. And we're going to do that again in a moment. But I love this 84-year-old widow named Anna realizing that she still had a little bit left in the tank. And the last line about her life was that she told everyone that hope had come. There was a child that would change everything. So I pray that the power of the gospel is louder than discouragement in our lives and the discouragement of our circumstances. I believe that our response is to worship and then to tell everyone that hope has come and hope has a name, and his name is Jesus. Would you stand to your feet and prepare to worship that name all over again? Lord in heaven, I pray right now that our hearts should be so full of faith and so full of joy and so full of hope. You have come for us. You see us, you know us, you love us, and you are here with us. So may the good news of the gospel rise up in this moment. God, I pray that our hearts would begin to lift and worship you. And Lord, put a message on our tongue and in our lives to share with everyone. Hope has a name, and his name is Jesus. Let's worship that name. Time together. And I exalt thee. I exalt thee. I exalt thee. Oh Lord. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Oaks Church on our YouTube channel. Our prayer is that you were encouraged and your faith was strengthened today.
That's right. And we want to let you know that we would love to connect with you through our online family in our OC Online Facebook group. To do that, you can like our Oaks Church page and click Join Group.
Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and press the bell for notifications. You'll have access to life-giving sermons and worship that will be a blessing to you and your family.
Yeah, we'd love to have you join us live for our Sunday and Wednesday services. We hope you have a great day today. Thank you for watching, and God bless.